London, 1846. The air in the operating theater is thick enough to choke on. It smells of stale blood, unwashed bodies, and the sharp, pine-scented sawdust scattered across the floorboards. A grim preventative measure to soak up the mess that is about to be made. You are not in a sterile sanctuary of healing. You are in a pit of necessary violence. The gallery above is packed to the rafters. Rows of medical students, curious onlookers, and rival surgeons lean over the wooden railings, their breath forming a cloud of collective anticipation in the damp air. They haven't come to witness a healing. They have come to see a performance. And the star of this macabre show stands at the center of the room, rolling up his blood-stiffened sleeves. Robert Liston is a towering figure, 6 feet 2 inches of Scottish grit and terrifying competence. In this brutal age before anesthesia, when every second of surgery is a second of excruciating, mind-shattering torture for the patient, Liston is considered a savior, not because he is gentle. There is simply no time for gentleness, but because he is fast, inhumanly fast. They call him the fastest knife in the West End. He is a man who can amputate a leg in 2.5 minutes. On his best days, under 30 seconds. To the man strapped to the wooden table, writhing in the grip of the dressers, strong medical students whose primary qualification is their ability to hold a screaming human being still, Liston is the only hope of surviving the shock of pain. "Time me, gentlemen," Liston barks, his voice cutting through the nervous murmurs of the crowd like a whip. He snaps his silver pocket watch open and slaps it onto the side table. The ticking begins. It is a sound that seems louder than the whimpers of the patient, a rhythmic countdown to potential oblivion. Tick, tick, tick. It is the metronome of life and death. Liston's eyes are wide, focused, almost manic. He isn't looking at the patient as a person anymore. He can't afford to let empathy slow his hand. To him, the weeping, trembling man is a problem of geometry and physics, a biological puzzle that must be solved before the body gives out from the sheer agony of the trauma. His left hand grips the patient's thigh, his fingers digging into the flesh to compress the artery, acting as a human tourniquet. His right hand hovers over the tray of instruments, seeking the familiar cold steel. He doesn't look down. He knows exactly where the knife is. He grabs it, a long, gleaming blade that has seen too much red today. The metal is cold, but his grip is hot with adrenaline. The atmosphere is electric, vibrating with a morbid curiosity. The students in the front row jostle for a better view, leaning dangerously close to the splash zone, ignoring the risk for the sake of the spectacle. They want to see the master at work. They want to see the blur of motion that defies the limitations of the human hand. Liston feels the weight of their eyes, the judgment of his peers, and the terrifying responsibility of his gift. Speed is mercy. Speed is survival. If he hesitates, the man dies. If he is too slow, the shock stops the heart. He takes a breath, holding it in his lungs like a diver about to plunge into deep, freezing water. The knife is raised. The gallery goes silent, save for the desperate, ragged breathing of the man on the table. This is the precipice. For Robert Liston, this is the moment where skill meets destiny, unaware that today his greatest gift is about to become a curse. The knife flashes. The blade descends. It is not a careful cut. It is a slash, driven by the raw, muscular power of Liston's shoulder and the frantic necessity of the clock. In the mind of the surgeon, time has distorted. The world outside the operating circle, the gallery, the dusty windows, the bustling city of London has ceased to exist. There is only the leg, the knife, and the ticking watch. He moves with the ferocity of a wild animal, a predator tearing through obstacles to reach the finish line. The first incision is made, parting flesh to the bone in a single fluid motion that most surgeons would need 3 strokes to achieve. The patient screams, a raw, primal sound that tears through the soul of anyone not hardened by years in this bloody trade. But Liston does not flinch. He cannot. To pause is to fail. He reaches for the saw, his movements a blur.
The transition from knife to saw usually takes a competent surgeon several seconds of adjustment. Liston does it in a heartbeat. But in this frenzy of speed, in this tunnel vision of absolute focus, the boundaries of the patient's body blur with the surrounding space. The adrenaline that fuels his speed also blinds him to the periphery. In his haste to switch instruments, Liston swings the knife back to clear his working space. It is a wide, sweeping arc, meant to be efficient, meant to save a fraction of a second. But the arc is too wide. The movement is too wild. He doesn't feel the resistance at first, so sharp is his blade and so forceful is his swing, but he has caught something. Not the patient. His young assistant, a dedicated student, holding the patient's leg with a white-knuckled grip to keep it steady against the saw, suddenly recoils. He stares at his hand in disbelief, his brain unable to process the visual information. Where there were once 5 fingers, there are now stumps, blood welling up in a horrifying rhythmic rush. Liston has severed the assistant's fingers along with the patient's flesh. But the momentum of the knife doesn't stop there. The blade continues its deadly trajectory, catching the coattails of a distinguished elderly spectator who had leaned in too close, eager to witness the miracle of speed from the front row. The heavy fabric rips with a loud, distinct tear. The spectator's eyes widen in sheer, unadulterated terror. He looks down, sees the slash in his coat, sees the blood spraying from the table and the assistant's hand, and his mind makes a catastrophic leap. In the confusion and the gore, he believes the knife has pierced his own body. The shock is instantaneous and overwhelming. His face goes ashen, his hand clutches his chest, and he collapses to the floor, stone dead before he even hits the wood. Chaos erupts in the theater. The dressers lose their grip as they stare at the falling spectator. The assistant is screaming, clutching his mangled hand, blood pooling at his feet. The patient is bleeding out on the table, the operation half finished. And in the center of it all stands Liston, the saw in his hand, frozen for the first time in his professional life. The red mist of concentration lifts, replaced by the stark crimson reality of what he has just done. The fastest knife in the West End has moved faster than human reflexes could track, and in doing so, he has turned a routine amputation into a slaughterhouse. The pocket watch on the table ticks on, indifferent to the carnage, marking the seconds of a disaster that has unfolded in less time than it takes to draw a breath.
The operating theater eventually clears, but the heavy, metallic smell of iron and fear lingers in the room for days. The silence that follows the screaming is oppressive, filled with the unspoken knowledge that a fundamental line has been crossed. The initial chaos has subsided, the bodies have been moved, but the true toll of those 2 frantic, cursed minutes is only just beginning to reveal itself. This is the dark era before the germ theory of disease has taken hold, before Lister and Pasteur revolutionized hygiene. It is a time when the invisible monsters of infection prowled the hospital wards, waiting for an opening. And Liston, with his lightning-fast blade, has unwittingly provided them with 3. The patient, the original intended beneficiary of this merciful speed, does not survive. The shock of the botched ordeal, combined with the inevitable onset of hospital gangrene in the stump, claims his life within days. It is a common outcome in these times, a tragic but expected statistic in a world where recovery is a gamble. But the tragedy does not stop at the patient's bedside. The young assistant, the promising student whose only crime was holding on too tight and trusting his mentor, lies in a fevered delirium in a nearby ward. His hand, bandaged and throbbing, turns black. The rot spreads up his arm, poisoning his blood. He follows the patient into the grave, a victim of the very speed he sought to emulate. And then there is the spectator, the elderly gentleman who died on the floor of the theater. His autopsy reveals no wound, no cut to his skin. His coat was slashed, but his body was untouched by the blade. He died of terror. His heart, overwhelmed by the sight of the blood and the absolute certainty of his own demise, simply stopped.
It is a death that seems almost farcical if it weren't so deeply, painfully tragic. A man killed by the mere suggestion of injury, a victim of the atmosphere of fear that permeated early surgery. One surgery, one knife, 3 deaths. The math is horrific and unique in the annals of medical history, a 300% mortality rate. It stands as a grim monument to an era of medicine that was reaching its breaking point. Liston was the best of his time, the pinnacle of what was possible with steel and speed alone. But he was also a symbol of the desperate limits of that approach. His skill was undeniable, but the tools and the knowledge of the time were simply not enough to save lives consistently. Just months after this catastrophe, the first public demonstration of ether anesthesia would take place. The screams would stop. The need for reckless, blinding speed would vanish. Surgeons would learn to slow down, to wash their hands, to be careful. But the story of Robert Liston's deadliest day remains. It is a stark, bloody reminder of the path we have walked. It forces us to look at the sterile, beep-filled operating rooms of today, not with boredom or fear, but with profound gratitude. We stand on the shoulders of giants, yes, but some of those giants stood in pools of blood, armed with nothing but a sharp knife and a stopwatch, racing against death. And on that fateful day, losing spectacularly.